Education matters. I think we all agree because you're sitting in a dark room all day long while it is a beautiful sunny fall day outside, right? So education can be transformative. It was for me. I got the punchline because we got my bio already, but my dad was a high school dropout. And I'm a professor. I've testified before Congress, and I've gone to the White House, and I write for the New York Times, and all of this would have been completely unimaginable for my mother and my father. So education can be transformative. I started doing research after I became an economist into educational inequality. And as I did, I learned that my experience was very unusual. So not many kids have the kind of chance that I do. If you look at my generation, kids born in the 60s, we're not kids anymore, we were then, 19% of low-income kids would grow up to get a BA. That's compared to 55% of kids who were born into high-income families. Today, boosted a bit for the low-income kids, it's gone up to 29%. It shot up for the high-income kids to 80%. Enormous disparities by income, by accident of birth, and who goes to college. These numbers look even starker if you consider who actually gets a BA. So I got my BA. I had no idea how lucky I was. In my generation, 1 out of 20 low-income kids, 5% of low-income kids went on to get a BA. Go forward 20 years, that has inched up painfully little. It's at 9%. 9% of low-income kids in our country will grow up to get a BA. For high-income kids, it's 54%. High-income kids in our country are 6 times more likely to get a BA than low-income kids. Now, I don't know about you, but when I learned these statistics, and I did this research with a colleague at Michigan, Martha Bailey, who's also an economist, I was shocked by them, and frankly, I was shamed by them. You know, the United States is one of the richest countries in the world, and we were leaders in democratizing and expanding access first to high school at the start of the 20th century, and then higher education. But this rising tide has not been lifting all boats. Now, why are these gaps so appallingly large? It starts very early. So by the time she's 3 years old, a low-income child will have heard 30 million fewer words than a child who grew up in more advantaged circumstances. So when she gets to kindergarten, she's got a verbal deficit, and she's behind her peers. These gaps between the low-income kids and the higher-income kids grow as kids move through school. They don't shrink, they grow. In an ideal education system, we would shrink gaps between kids based on their happenstance of their birth, but in our system they grow, and they're at their largest once kids are in high school. Now, some kids manage to beat the odds, and they go through elementary school, middle school, high school, and they perform as well as kids who came from more advantaged backgrounds. You know, they score well on standardized tests, for example. But even then, even if they've beaten the odds in this way, they are less likely to get a BA than wealthy kids are. So a kid who scores in the top of their high school class, but who comes from a low-income background, has a 41% chance of getting a BA. A wealthy kid with those top scores, 74%. In fact, the low-income kid with the top scores is no more likely to get a BA than the high-income kid with mediocre scores. Okay, so we've got some serious inequality in the US and opportunity for education. So how do we fix this? Researchers, educators, policymakers have identified solutions that actually do the job of improving the education of kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. A great example is small classes. So if a kid is in smaller classes benefit everybody, but in particular low-income kids benefit the most from small classes. And as a result, having smaller classes shrinks gaps in the academic achievement between high and low-income kids, in their college attendance, and in their college completion. It does all of those jobs. Unfortunately, it's extremely expensive. And we are currently living in a political environment where the will to raise taxes to do this kind of work does not seem to be forthcoming. I hope it will be someday. So there are big solutions: small classes, improved training of our teacher workforce, free college. Big solutions that require a lot of money and that require a lot of political movement. And then there are some smaller solutions, some simpler solutions that are incremental, but brick by brick start to take down the walls that lie between low-income kids and the education that they deserve. And I want to nominate my candidate for the barrier I would like to take down the most. And this is, I was going to say who's seen a FAFSA, but I apparently do not need to. This is the FAFSA. This is the free application for federal student aid. The FAFSA is what lies between any person who wants to go to college and a grant, a scholarship, a loan for college. It's required of anybody who wants to get aid for college. The form, this is all the pages of the form is 108 questions and dozens of pages of arcane instructions. And I say this as an economist who's used to arcane verbiage. This is fairly complicated. Now consider, in a high-income family, parents have gone to college, they've done this already, the parent fills out this form, right? The parent wades through the 108 questions about assets, income, overseas holdings, clergy income, black lung benefits. All of these questions are asked on the FAFSA. They get through it. Think about a low-income kid whose parents didn't go to college, perhaps whose parents didn't speak English. They don't speak English. Imagine them trying to get through this form on their own. In fact, they can't get through it on their own because they need a lot of information from their parents about their financial situation. A lot of kids don't get through the form. So there are estimates that about 2 million low-income people who would qualify for federal aid don't fill out the FAFSA. Now, if you don't fill out the FAFSA, you don't get aid. Some of those people who don't get aid, well, they won't go to college. Others who don't get aid will go to college, but they're going to struggle financially. Right? They're going to need to pay tuition and pay their living expenses without any aid. They're going to take on an extra job, work extra hours. And if it all comes crashing down because they can't do the work and the school and the family, they'll drop out. And in fact, the dropout rate for kids who come from low-income backgrounds is twice as high as it is for higher-income kids. Now, what I find most frustrating about this, oh, I forgot some pages. What I find most frustrating about this particular, is that it? That's it, okay. This is what's most frustrating about this form is that it is unnecessary. This form is an unnecessary barrier that lies between low-income kids and the education they deserve. Why is it unnecessary? Well, it took a lot of statistical analysis and many refereed articles that I wrote, but I found a simple fact, right? You often find a simple fact after a lot of work and a lot of digging. Once you know somebody's income, you know if they need aid. Right? You need an economist to tell you that, right? So if somebody has a very high income, you don't need to ask them if they're getting food stamps to find out that they're not going to be eligible for aid. And if somebody has a very low income, you don't need to ask about their 401k, which does not exist. Right? So you can come very, very close to the current distribution of aid that we have now based on these 108 questions using just 2 questions. What is your income and what is your family size? There is some action on the policy front in terms of trying to fix this. So 2 senators have put out legislation, Lamar Alexander and William Bennett. This is a rare case of inter-party cooperation that would reduce the FAFSA to 2 questions, those 2 questions. So that's terrific news. I would like to meet them and raise them and suggest that rather than just cut this form down to 2 questions, we just get rid of it completely. Because think about it, those 2 questions, what is your family income, what's your household structure, they're already in the federal databases. When you fill out your taxes each year, you provide highly detailed information about what your income is, how many dependents you have. Right? So you can calculate what somebody's aid would be based only on the information that's on their tax forms. A tiny little checkbox could constitute the aid application, could replace all of those pages of the FAFSA. And then based on somebody's income, in fact, we could not even wait until they checked that box. We could push out information to families, telling them how much aid they would be eligible for if a family member went to college. Now imagine actually pushing out that crucial information to families when it can make a difference for people's aspirations, rather than making them claw over mountains of paperwork in order to get that information. Now this might sound like a small, simple thing to do, but we've got evidence that it would make an outsized difference. So there was a terrific randomized trial that was, I'm an economist, I think randomized trials are terrific. So funded by the Gates Foundation, where a set of low-income families were exposed to a much simpler aid application. Other poor souls got business as usual, the current Byzantine complicated system. When it was over, 8 percentage point increase in the college going of those who got the simplified system. Now 8 percentage points might not sound like much, but remember, 29% of low-income families go to college, of people from low-income families go to college. So proportionally, that's a big jump. It's also an incredibly big bang for a very small buck. This intervention cost less than $100. And it had the impact of scholarship programs that cost thousands of dollars. So it could make a serious difference in people's lives. There are no serious logistical barriers or technical barriers to making this happen. All it requires is an act of Congress, which is akin to an act of God at this point. But I have hope that this work actually could get done. Education is one of the few topics that the Republicans and the Democrats actually are working together on, in the Senate at least, and to some extent in the House. So I have hope that this is going to happen. It should. Right? We need to, brick by brick, take down the walls that lie between low-income kids and the education they deserve, because everyone deserves to have the opportunity to be transformed. Thank you.